earlier today. Everybody's heard about it. Everybody's talking about it on social media. And it is the chainsaw attacker at the Black Lives Matter protests happening in downtown McAllen earlier today. Now, as many of you might know, this man has been detained, but we do not know what the charges are yet. His name, interestingly, was not released, mentioned by either the Monitor or, according to the Monitor, by the McAllen Police Department. Usually, we see a lot in the local papers, in the local news. When somebody's arrested, they go as far as even showing the headshot after they've been arrested at the police station, names, ages, town of origin, everything. But not clear yet why. His identity has not been revealed. Now, I know that there are some names going around on social media. However, I was sent multiple screenshots of different names that actually could have been him. Same last name, different first names. So I was unable to confirm that way. The Monitor is always able to confirm with police, but this time they didn't. So we don't have official confirmation of who he is, and we also don't know what he might be charged with. Now, the video that I'm about to show is what happened earlier today in downtown McAllen at a Black Lives Matter protest. Trigger warnings. There's a lot of very hateful speech. There's some aggression, some physical aggression in the video. So to those who don't wish to watch that, I would hop off the live stream for now. We'll be back with our next topic at about 8:30, but I'm going to be showing these videos because I think it's very important to talk about racism and colorism in the Rio Grande Valley. A lot of people this week have been saying they don't exist, but as we will see from this video, it does exist in the valley. So again, this is the original video that played on social media. Again, trigger warning on this hate speech here on this video. Let's take a look at what happened in downtown McAllen.
Get the fuck out of here! Sorry! Sorry! Get the fuck home! Get the fuck home! That bullshit with some fucking nigger and a bad cop do not belong here! This is not up there! This is here! Get the fuck home! You fucking idiots, do this shit again! Get the fuck out of here! I don't give a shit. No, you work. They're not doing anything, bro. No, they're escalating the bullshit. Hey! Move! I'm not even with them. Get the fuck out of here!
So, as you saw from that video, a little bit different angle than what we saw on social media earlier. But I wanted to show that that video that you just saw is before the man went back to his vehicle and took out a chainsaw to then confront the crowd. In the video we just saw, we saw him handling protesters physically. We saw him destroying posters. So at a minimum, it could be something like assault and destruction of property, something like that. And that video definitely shows that part. And we'll play it again so that you can see the section where he handles one of the protesters. Let's go now to the other video that shows him after he went back to his truck and came at the crowd with a powered chainsaw, unfortunately.
Whoa! Hey! Move! Move! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Go home! Don't let those fucking niggas up there fool you! Don't let those fucking trash and Antifa bullshit people fool you! Don't let these pendejos right here! Don't let these fucking assholes lie to you! Don't let them lie to you! This is a valley!
So that shows the rest of this incident. So there's actually two videos, one before the chainsaw, where he physically handles at least one of the protesters, destroys some of the posters. Now, there could have been more interaction that's not on video, but this is what we have seen. And so at some point, you can hear in the video somebody yelling, "Call 911." The cops were called, and they did show up. However, this individual was not detained. The police officers talked to him, and he was still very aggressive and I think belligerent, but the cops did not detain him. Let's take a look at that conversation that the police officers had with him after they arrived on the scene.
Mr. Payne, I will gladly go home. Just tell them to go home. Don't let them put up with this shit. Please don't put up with this shit.
They're not doing anything wrong.
Mr. Payne, I will gladly go home. Just tell them to go home.
So I guess he was able to talk to the police officers, explain maybe what he was doing there, even though he did physically attack somebody, did destroy these posters, did threaten protesters' lives with this powered saw, and also yelled racist words and threats into the crowd. He was not detained for a reason that is still unclear. I know there's been a Monitor news story out and some coverage on social media from other channels, but that question has not yet been technically addressed of why this man, who had just clearly shown intent to injure people with a saw, was actually just let go right after to perhaps either continue threatening or go through with his threats. So a very dangerous situation, unclear why he wasn't detained. At that point, there were a lot of posts on social media of the video, a lot of sharing, a lot of outcry for this man to be detained. And so one of the images being shared online was frames from the video showing the logo on that truck that the man is shown exiting from. And Twitter got to work to find out who this individual was. And again, there were some, confirmations of the business, who it was, the name and everything. But again, I did receive a lot of direct messages with more information about who this person could be. And there was more than one that looked right, with same last name, two different first names. So I chose not to choose one of them on my own without seeing some kind of confirmation from and they both look similar, by the way. It might have been just a case of him having two different profiles. So wasn't 100% sure, didn't want to record on video the whole situation. But with this, they were able to post some of these names up on the internet and try to get to the bottom of this. But ultimately, he was detained. Now, I want to talk about the racism and the colorism that exists here in the Valley. We've spent so many days since the murder of George Floyd and the protests around the country that were a result of that here in the Valley, talking about or debating between people whether or not racism and colorism exists in the Valley. Spending a lot of time on that on social media, between accounts, in public discussions. And I think that this man's actions to stop this protest actually prove the opposite of his point, which is that we do need these protests here. We do need to have these conversations here. And my question is, how might have this turned out differently if this was a different crowd? So if this man had done this at a business event, at a community event, at the convention center, at, I don't know, at Sombrero Fest, came out here swinging with, a live saw, and threatened the crowd like that, would the police's reaction have been the same? And I think that the answer is no. I don't think so. I think that that man would have been detained, and I think that he would have been dealt with much more aggressively. But it didn't happen here. And it makes you wonder if it was because he was threatening a crowd of protesters who were protesting against the police in the first place. So perhaps those cops chose to handle this in a much less aggressive way in that context. Does that show racism, colorism? Just the fact that different people are protected differently in our community, I think that it does. I think that it does. in terms of how the cops reacted, in terms of how the police department took its time to then detain this man, and in terms of some of the language being shown here, and also, which I'm not going to show on the show, is some of the reactions from around the Rio Grande Valley to the video. They were not all in agreement with the protesters, and they were not all against the action of the police officers or anything like that. So, these issues are very important here. I think that this has really brought out for a lot of people how we need to talk about not just police, but all sort of law enforcement, immigration enforcement organizations on the border. And we're actually going to talk about some of that later in this episode when we talk about District 27, when we talk about Eddie Lucio Jr. building basically an immigration detention center in Raymondville, spending almost $1 trillion on that. Almost $1 billion. And so we have to have this conversation, right? And we're going to have a little bit of talk on that a little bit, but the people who are afraid to talk about this, the people who don't want to have conversations in the Valley about this, to them I say, it's not that complicated. And it's not something that, and I've spoken to a lot of people in private on this, who have messaged me about it because they see me posting in solidarity with justice for George Floyd, in solidarity with justice for all black communities who are being ravaged by police violence. So they hear terms like abolish the police, they hear terms like police reform, things like that. And I think a lot of people in the Valley, unfortunately, have reacted very negatively to something like that, but it could be that they have just not really examined the fact that we are spending hundreds of millions of dollars to treat people very violently, to destroy families, to destroy lives, money that we could be using in our community for something else. So when we say abolish the police, for those people who are listening, who may not be in agreement with that, when we say abolish the police, what we really mean is that the police force over the last couple of decades has really become a military force and has become a law enforcement through different organizations. Right now we have ICE and Border Patrol, we have Homeland Security, we have the police officers. We've got everybody now, so many different departments doing enforcement on the border, and much more powerful than they used to be. So even just the equipment they have, just the fact that the Border Patrol 100 miles within the border of the country doesn't have to respect your rights, your constitutional rights, in the same way that they would in other areas. We live under those conditions now. So it's very simple to say, look, maybe this has gone a little bit too far. Can we roll this back? Do we have to spend billions of dollars to militarize these people now? Another thing that we can talk about when we say abolish the police or reform police is, can we make cops more responsible for when they do bad things? And that's very simple. That's very, very simple, because right now, I'm going to give you a term. It's a 2-word term, and if you've never heard of it, I want you to Google this and I want you to read about it, because it's really going to inform you how simple, really, a lot of this topic is in terms of the structure of government. In terms of racism, that's very complicated. But when we're talking about the structure of government, the phrase is qualified immunity. Qualified immunity in this country. And to give it to you directly, qualified immunity is a law that went into effect in the 80s and basically makes police officers immune from any bad behavior that they partake in, unless there is some case in the past very specific to what is happening in the present case that, was concluded as guilty in the past. So if in the past a police officer was found guilty in the exact same situation that you're going through with this police officer today, then he might get convicted. But otherwise, he's got qualified immunity. So a little bit complex, you should read about it, but the ultimate effect is that today in our country, police officers can injure, they can kill, they can do things even out of maliciousness. The law actually has that word in it for qualified immunity. If the police officer is found to have done it maliciously, they are still protected unless there was some legal precedent that would convict them. So again, it's just very simple. We have this police force that's now really a military inside the country that has qualified immunity to do whatever they want, to kill people, to injure people, to do things maliciously. And we are seeing that on social media. We are seeing so many videos of police officers beating and shooting people in crowds, peaceful protests. And the one, I think, major one in people's minds is a peaceful protest, completely peaceful protest of people in Lafayette Park across from the White House that was cleared out with smoke bomb, with the tear gas and rubber bullets, so the president could take a walk across the street to a church through Lafayette. And so this is what we're talking about. This is what we're talking about. I saw actually a horrific video earlier this week, and I'm not going to play it, but of an elderly man, and I know many of you probably saw it, an elderly man, maybe in his 60s, 70s, or 80s even, and the cops literally just shoved this man for no reason. I mean, he was walking around. He might have been asking for directions. He fell back, hit his head, immediately started bleeding. His life's in danger. He's dying. None of the cops did anything to help. Walked by. One guy eventually kind of circled around, said something on his radio, maybe getting help after seeing all this blood on the ground. And that's what they can do. That's what they can behave. So, in effect, that's what we've got walking around. And when we say abolish the police, it's not that complicated. Okay? We're just talking about, hey, you can't just kill anybody whenever you want to. There's going to be legal consequences for you. If you're a cop, you're walking around, you shove an old man into the sidewalk and he cracks his head open, you can't do that. It should not be legal, but it's legal today. So it's completely ridiculous. Qualified immunity, look that up. And another part of changing laws, another thing that I would recommend looking into is police violence across the country. There's a fantastic website called Mapping Police Violence that collects all of the black deaths that occur under the hands of police departments in precincts across the country. And again, go onto this website. What we see there is that communities with the same demographics, same level of violent crime, same, population density and size, you compare them and you have some communities where the police is killing dozens of black people a year, and then similar communities where there hasn't been a black murder in years. Right? And these communities that are being ravaged by these racist precincts, they're right there. But investigations are not opened. Right? Nobody's investigating. Justice Department, FBI, they're just there. And we're collecting that data and we're looking at it. And statistically alone, we see that, yes, this is happening. There are precincts where statistically alone, we know it's impossible to see that kind of data unless that police department is killing people on purpose to the tune of dozens of people a year, every year. And if you check out Mapping Police Violence, unfortunately, you will see that at least it's 1,000 plus deaths a year of black people in these communities that we're talking about. So that's what we're talking about when we say this is not good. That's what the protesters are talking about here in the Valley and everywhere else when they're saying there's got to be a change, something's got to happen. Right? Is that we've reached that point in this country where that's the kind of law enforcement that we have in this country. And people are saying, We don't want that anymore. It doesn't work for our communities anymore. We're being murdered by these people. We're not being protected by these people. So, in that case, you could say that if all of that is true, then we already live in a state of lawlessness. Except the outlaws are wearing badges. And that is absolutely true. If everything I have said before this is true, if a person with a badge can murder without consequences, if they are equipped to do that on a military level capacity without consequences, then we can say that we already live in a lawless state. So there's no need to worry about coming chaos. It's already here. This can already happen to you. You don't have to be afraid of what's going to happen if the police aren't around. The police are already doing this. And I think we're going to do some episodes in the future of how this authority is being overused in our area in the following weeks, because there's actually quite a lot there. I don't want to shift the focus from Black Lives Matters for this episode, but there's plenty in our region that's going on, and we will have a segment in a little bit about some of that when we look at Eddie Lucio Jr.'s voting record. So let's take a look one more time at this video. I just want to play this one more time because I want you all to see when this protester handled this person.
Get the fuck out of here. Sorry. Sorry. Get the fuck.
And so you can see
That bullshit was a fucking nigger and a bad cop do not belong here.
shouting there.
This is not up there. This is here. Get the fuck home. You fucking idiots. Do this shit again.
There he touched somebody there. And they're trying to keep him calm and stand in front of him. Right there, he grabs a poster, folds it up, rips it up, and right there he grabs that young lady and shoves her around and takes her poster back. So that's what we're dealing with there. So we saw that contact, and then we definitely saw this, which is the most violent part. And we can hear from the audio that that powered chainsaw was on when he threatened people with it.
Don't let these pendejos right here. Don't let these fucking assholes lie to you. Don't let them lie to you.
So we don't know what the charges are yet, but we do expect for them to be something because we saw a lot going on there in this attack. Very dangerous man, and hopefully we'll see some of those charges coming out. We will be talking about a lot of the points that I just mentioned in this segment as the weeks go on. I'm not going to let the story die. We have to talk about law enforcement. We have to talk about what is happening in our region and across the entire country, which we are absolutely a part of. Our right to assemble anywhere is the same as our right to assemble here, and we have to, as citizens, as good citizens, protect those rights.